there have been songs I've written about this, right? I'll bring up one example, right? If people haven't seen this, Ed Sheeran's Perfect, right? And it goes like this. I found the love for me. Darling, just dive right in and follow my lead, right? It goes like that.
Welcome on the show, Dr. Gordon Chiu. It's great to connect with you. Just before we get started into a conversation, I just want to do a quick introduction of yourself, and then I'll pass you and give you the opportunity to tell our audience more about, what you're doing and how you've come to where you are today. So I think you got a really impressive resume, if I could put it that way: an inventor, creator, an entrepreneur. You're a private academic coach, an educator, public speaker, a lecturer, a corporate advisor, a husband, and a father. Definitely a gentleman that wears many different hats and have been very successful in the past, 20, 30 years or so. I read somewhere that you've got about 32 patents under your belt. You've developed this academy called Dr. Wholesome. Yeah. And it was born after the birth of your two daughters, right? So really interested to hear, your existential journey, what made you who you are today. But also, I think it's the right time to pass to you, and maybe you can tell the audience a bit more about yourself, and how you become where you are today.
Well, telling you about myself, I mean, there's a lot of videos out there that have different interviews. So I'll give you a different flavor, try to make it a little different. I decided to reassess my priorities. As you described, I had this extensive paper trail, right, of abilities. And if you started dicing up different countries of how my patents that you mentioned, 31, 32, they usually grant them and then different countries follow through. So if you sorted them by country, then that number would jump up. You could add zeros, right? Add zeros to the end of things. And, we as humans are very fascinated by zeros, Zero by itself, not so much. So 0, 0, 0, not so interesting, but 1, 0, 10. 100, that's 100, 1000, 1000, and we get fascinated by collecting these increases. But I decided to reassess my priorities, to refocus on how can I choose the deals that don't just make monetary gain, but actually lead to friendships, long-term friendships, or how do I share an idea on a test, but then use that to change someone's trajectory in life, as opposed to, let me just score on the test. So the difference between a scholar versus a good test taker or a high scorer is not what we all want, right? Because what kind of limited constraints do we have, or constraints in general? What do we have? We have one planet. We have all of us as stakeholders in that one planet. So how do I use my remaining time left to change that, right? I didn't start off just coming up with the concept of Dr. Wholesome's Academy for my children. I've been tutoring and coaching kids for 32, 33 years. But my former self was, let's just help you get the score because that's what parents want. And then I would get them near perfect scores. But that didn't mean that they were good people. So self-criticizing, having a long list of patents and accomplishments doesn't mean that I would leave a good obituary. Having a great resume doesn't mean you have a good obituary. So start thinking about the consequences of what we do. That kind of hit me. And like you, Aaron, they found that to be intriguing. So rip your life apart, right? And then gets you a second TED Talk. First TED Talk was on graphene, right? A new material that would get us off the planet or build new materials. I want to theme up our interview today with an idea, is that we left the Stone Age not because we ran out of stones. Plenty of stones around us. Why did we leave the Stone Age? So that we could do better. We could have better materials. The Iron Age, the Steel Age, Plastic Age, maybe not so good about that. And then the Silicon Age, right? The rise of Silicon Valley and the AI, age of AI. And age is not just some fad. It is a prolonged period where we human beings start utilizing things that we discover and come up with do things. But also there was the age of the coronavirus, right? Not necessarily an age, but a period, or maybe it can be an age. It's too early to tell. So when I think about how do I teach my children best way to live their life, it's by example. If I am not willing to make them my core, then when I try to tell them to do something, there's certain pushback, right? Pushback. And maybe the pushback is, some people may qualify that as a teenage reaction. But if I look at it differently, is this is nature versus nurture, is that nature is telling me that I'm not doing the homework in order to protect you, species, human species, so that I don't become a robot somewhere. Oh, that's interesting, because that can get you a book like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, right? You know, live your own life and do those kinds of things and not care about corporate so much, right? So who's right? What's right? And it was in that journey that I said, oh, I don't know what's right, but I do know that I'm an American-born Chinese who's illiterate and cannot read or write. And that's the consequences of growing up in this country and the United States of America. But maybe if I've married a wonderful woman and if she wants to and she can coach my kids, then maybe they don't have to grow up to be like me. So one of the daddy moments was we're at the karaoke place, right? And I said to them, you know, all those songs mom sing, I can't sing for you. Can't. No, I cannot sing for you. And you admit that to your kids when they're 2 years old, right? And then they start talking, and she says, my youngest one says, yeah, you can't sing for us. I said, yeah. And you have a choice, I said, to be like me or to be like mom, right? So choose, right? Not for any test, right? But to have options in life, right? And what kind of options do we want? Well, what about work optional, right? Do we have to go into a job, right? Or can we be work optional if so-and-so isn't nice to us just because they give us a raise? Doesn't necessarily mean we'll stay, because it's really not about the money at the end of the day. It's about a lot of other intangibles that make us who we are. I think that we're starting to realize that. And so telling you about me, right? And, you know, there's the interviews that have happened in the past and all those interviews that will happen in the future. But I wanted to give you a different version of it, is because you wrote the book about being a dad, right? Being a dad and how much your family matters to you. Well, that's so essential. So essential. It's the defining moment. That there have been songs I've written about this, right? I'll bring up one example, right? If people haven't seen this, is Ed Sheeran's Perfect, right? And it goes like this: I found a love for me, darling, just dive right in and follow my lead, right? It goes like that. And you say, wow, you know how hard it is to find a Cantonese-speaking, literate woman to love me because I can't read or write? Well, that's hard. Statistically, that's hard. Like, why would you want to go with a deaf or dumb, right? So that's me, right? And then when you find that person, what kind of environment you want to do? Oh, no, I want to go and work every day until you grow old and miss all those moments with you. Is that really what you want to do? Right? So if you're feeling that, then you're feeling how I felt. And I said, you know what? I'm going to sell everything. And I'm going to start all over again. 32 patents. By the way, those patents kept getting granted, right, as I left. And they more and more get granted. And it's still getting granted now. So maybe I'll end up with 64, right? By the time, you know, another interview happens. But it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter, because it really is about how can I maximize the time. Once I found a love for me, right, then I just dive right. I asked her to dive right in and follow my lead. So where's my accountability when it comes to that, right? So I'll stop there and let you ask more questions.
Well, I was going to say that was a very powerful introduction there, Doctor. You mentioned about ripping yourself up, right? I wanted to ask you, when was your aha moment? Was it right after your daughters were born?
Oh, so it was like, your first vaccination. Definitely some people feel it, other people don't feel it. But then my second injection, my second daughter, oh boy, did I fought it initially. I brought my first daughter to 11 countries. Yeah, her passport was stamped. Before she was 1, she went to 11 countries. She's been to Israel. She's been to Malaysia, Indonesia, Hong Kong, Singapore, living from hotel to hotel. Isn't that amazing? Sounds great. But now think she's now 10 years old. Right now she's 7, but imagine if she was 10 and daddy kept doing that. If I did that, what would happen? She wouldn't have her focus, because the story would still be about me and how I was selfish and brought them along. And then it just keeps going on about me. And then suddenly I die. We all die. We all don't know the time of the day we will die. The accident will be, or no accident, whatever it may be. Some people get to die in their sleep. But then I suddenly go. And now the story and the camera lens focuses onto her, my oldest one, and then her sister, who's 18 months younger, and it focuses onto them. And then my wife, who followed my lead, right? Followed my lead, just like Ed Sheeran's perfect song. And now the song isn't perfect anymore. The story is imperfect because I dragged them along in that glory. So that second hit was in 2016 when my second daughter was born. I was thinking, like, if I died, what rights do they have as Asians with a husband who's an Asian inventor? What would happen if there was some kind of tension? What would happen? Well, I'm not there to be around to fight for them, to fend for them. Yeah. And then the lyrics came, that, well, I found a woman stronger than anyone I know. She's strong. She shares my dreams. I hope that someday I'll share her home. Oh, home. So if I'm going to share her home, don't I have to make that home for her? Don't I have to be there and create that ecosystem? So I'm too selfish to sell everything? Really? No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to sell everything. All right. And you can have it all. Right. And that's how I recreated this, because DWA, Dr. Holston's Academy, it didn't exist. It wasn't that story. And it wasn't a pivot. It was an epiphany. I needed to transcend, because I'm at the top of the mountain here. I don't want to be on that mountain. I want to be on this mountain, because she gave me a promise that she would be with me for the rest of her life. And I gave her a promise I would take care of them. I'm not taking care of them. I was taking care of myself if I suddenly died. So I then sold everything and went into different areas. Friends were shocked. You take that salary, right? She was shocked. Saying, like, right? And I said, we may not come back out of this the same, right? But we'll come out of this better.
Did you lose any friends over that transition?
Oh,
Did you
lose any friends? No,
that?
I shocked the ones, the one. Now let's qualify friends, right? Really close people who, you're able to talk about anything. That's how I would define friends, right? And no, I didn't lose them. We became substantially closer. I gained because I gave. So there was no loss. There was increase of dimension. There was a stasis of the former self, that version. And then it was a blossoming of a completely different environment. And I would ask my wife, how come you never questioned? When we first dated, I didn't question anything. You just followed my lead, right? Really followed my lead. This is such a perfect song, perfect for how to describe her. But then when I went in and got rid of everything, did that scare you? And she said, yes, it definitely did. It was very scary because you read about men who go through midlife crises, things like that, right? Yeah, usually it's not a good story, right? But I was looking at it from a perspective of a scientist. And I started looking at it as if I died, they're out in the street, they lose everything. They no longer have someone who's a creator who can think and invent. So, then what do? It's downhill from there, right? You cash out everything. So we might as well do that now while I'm still alive to watch it happen. I wanted to see it totally unfold and then restructure. So I went into commercial real estate. There's some interviews that talk about that. I also went into teaching. So in the morning I would teach, at night I would look at the commercial real estate, and then I would also look at things that would be trending like AI, artificial intelligence. And so I became a student again, and then looking at why collaborations and cultures and things fail. How do you get system failure? Well, when we don't understand each other, right? When we start having, you look at something like a big company, we use something like Nokia, right? That dominated the world. But because they didn't look at change and they looked at it only as pure exploitation, let me just keep on selling these phones to these people. Cheaper. I want to create the cheapest phone possible, but the world didn't want the cheapest phone. They wanted a functional phone. And so suddenly Nokia lost all their market share in that year, that critical moment, that collision event, right? So that when you have that collision event, that's when you really get tested, right? You get really tested. And Kodak had that moment. So the question is, do you need to go through a heart attack before you actually learn your lesson? And sometimes when you get the heart attack, you don't. Here's a statistic, is that the majority of S&P 500 companies do not stay listed on the S&P 500 beyond the average lifespan of a human being. So they get kicked out, maneuvered around, get delisted, whatever it may be. You don't exist on that exchange longer than the lifespan of a human being. So there's a lot of collisions, a lot of things that happen. And then there was the theory that if we keep giving people raises, that they'll just stay and you'll have retention of your top individuals. But that's not true either. And another example is, what about the son of an emperor or a king who decides, this isn't what I want to do? Are you crazy? You're going to throw away, right, your royalty? But then they see it completely from a different lens. So we can do that anytime. It's really, truly optional. Change your lens, right? I'm not asking you to be unsuccessful. I'm trying to look at a lens of an obituary as opposed to a lens of a resume. And when you can do that, then you can have different, deep realizations. So instead of a weak decision maker, you become a deep decision maker. And it's not spoiling your children. It's really letting them see it from a third person, is that if you can do that, then you can survive, and then you can learn to thrive, and you can start focusing on what's important. So that was the driving force, is that on every level, it was the right decision, right? And if I'm truly an entrepreneur, then I can do that, right? I've done it so many different times before. So definition of entrepreneurs, turn anything into a working business. So I went in there and I did that. And lo and behold, right, you now see what happened today. Now, different friends, you were asking me about friendships. One friend who is in Hong Kong asked me to work with them on my natural side of food and sustenance. Her name is Vindy Chan. Tan Wai, right? So when I did that, I started talking about health, but because I already made all that change, I then said, if I'm going to do this, forget about Dr. Wholesome, let's welcome Dr. Crazy, right? Okay. So now, right,
love that
this
way.
is Dr. Crazy. And what I'm about to tell you, just like what I was sharing with your listeners, is that it's okay to be a little crazy. All right. It's important to be a little crazy because of this other song, right? This song was sang by Patsy Cline, right? I'm gonna pull up the lyrics right here.
Go for it.
Right. And it says, crazy, I'm crazy for feeling so lonely, right? So crazy, crazy for feeling so lonely, crazy for feeling so blue. Now, how that moment occurred was I said, I'm going to convince myself that we're going to answer questions about your health and various things, but you really don't need me. You don't need me. You have plenty of experts in Hong Kong, really, right? So you're just going to leave me one day for another expert, or you're going to leave me one day for leaving me because you're healthy now. And the more I could get my mindset into that it didn't matter, the more it could be fun. And by doing that, you know what they thought? People thought that the government was shutting us down, right? Because like, if you do something like this, that must mean that, for liability purposes or something. No, it wasn't about that. And so the timing is perfect. The fact that you wanted to interview my choices and decisions, it was like, yeah, just be who you want to be for self-discovery, right? Let go of the ego. Stop thinking about it being you, because it's not about me. It's about them, about your viewers, right? And maybe I made it a little crazy and interesting. I don't know what's going to happen to your views now, right? Yeah.
No, it's great. I'm really enjoying this. It's very different, and I like how you're putting it. And there's so many points that I picked up along the way. That there's so many questions I want to ask you, but I'm just trying to figure out where to start.